It's Entrepreneur Rap, episode 008, alongside Brett Regan. I'm David Brickley. Every single week, we talk about business news, what we learned this week as entrepreneurs, what we're reading, tech tips, media spotlight, advice, all of that, and more. Brett, the last podcast of 2016.
It is the last podcast.
Hey.
It's been an interesting 2016, good and bad.
By the way, I don't like all the people saying like this year has to be over with the worst year ever. It's kind of overblown in my opinion.
You'll like my media spotlight then.
Okay.
Shall we get into it?
Let's do it.
Business news. Okay, I'll start here. We talked a lot about Twitter in the last several months with the ups and downs, the potential sales that did not come through. So, Mike, if you can pull up a tweet from Jack Dorsey, who is the co-founder of Twitter. The tweet reads, following in the footsteps of Brian Chesky, what's the most important thing you want to see Twitter improve or create in 2017? So this is Twitter reaching out to their user base to try and get some insight onto where they should go. Brian Chesky, who he references there, is a co-founder of Airbnb. Apparently they had some success previously in reaching out to their user base to get some ideas as to how to improve. So this is Twitter's attempt at trying to get some feedback from theirs as well. If you read through the chain, you can see that there are a lot of people that wanted to get some sort of edit button. Facebook's got one where you can edit a post after it goes out, but there was some back and forth on people focusing, would you know it, on Donald Trump by saying like, hey, this may turn into an issue where somebody can go back and revise what they've done in the past with the edit button. So if we are going to do something like that, it would need to have a revision history so that you could go back and see it.
Hey, Jack, I have an idea. An algorithm.
Right. Hey,
Jeez.
You should hit him up. He's asking.
I think
he's asking for the advice.
if he doesn't know it by now, I think he's not doing too well.
Yeah, so that was one, is the edit tool. I'm sure there's lots of people calling for an algorithm, and then just a better search feature where you can search tweets by keywords better. But overall, interesting year for Twitter. Who knows what's going to happen in 2017? My prediction is that Twitter will be bought in 2017, but for nowhere near the prices that they were expecting in 2016.
Well, and we've talked a lot about on this show in particular about how fast Instagram and Snapchat are moving, almost, checkmate back and forth with each other. And Twitter just hasn't done that. I mean, they went years, it feels like, without doing too many things. And we talked about Instagram the last 6 months have made like 5 major changes to their platform to really take a jab at Snapchat and become the number one maybe app or social app out there. And Twitter just doesn't move fast enough, and that's, I think, part of the problem.
I'm not sure if I agree necessarily that they didn't make any moves. It's just that they were swept out from other platforms.
You and I talked about how like 360 wasn't in their platform at all, and how they didn't integrate Periscope, try to make that a different app instead of making it very easy to use all within the Twitter app to go live. The ease of use and innovation on their side, I think, just wasn't, to their peers anyway, from Zuckerberg and Spiegel over at Snapchat, just wasn't as fast as those guys moved.
Yeah, I did find I was impressed with their acquisition of Vine. At the time, I thought Vine would have had a longer shelf life, and initially, it didn't seem like it really needed to be part of Twitter in the same way that Instagram didn't have to become part of Facebook, that it could be a standalone, and that failed for, I'm not sure why exactly, because it seemed like they had a pretty large user base. And then I was
it failed
super
because
impressed.
Nobody would use it except Vine stars. So you were on Vine all the time, but you never posted. So the same 59 people posted every day, but they were never able to get the big subset where they start getting 45 and 50-year-olds to use the platform.
Yeah. But I mean, I used Vine in the same way that I use Facebook, where maybe once in a blue moon I'll post something, but for the most part I'm just there to like view content.
But they need people posting. That's the name of the game, not just looking at it.
Right. But I mean, the views in terms of advertising dollars, it's almost more important to have people viewing something, because then you're going to be able to get ad dollars.
Yeah, but if you have 50 million
out.
people viewing the same 2 pieces of content, at the end of the day, you have to stock the shelves or something, and there just wasn't enough, enough content on the platform. Everybody can't just go to somewhere just to look at it and not post themselves. Like, you have to have users feeling the need to post and engage and do things with the content.
Yeah, I mean, that's a way to grow the feed, but in terms of actual advertising dollars, it has to come from, people viewing content more so. So, I mean,
where's the content come from? There's only 59. I mean, this is a silly example, but if there's only a select few of people actually posting daily or regularly on a platform, how do you then grow the content on the platform if everybody's just coming to look?
Right, but coming to look is the important part.
Yeah, but then you're also limited by.
But if you're Facebook, you're not
you're
earning
limited by
money.
just the content, only the content providers that are doing that.
Right, but you're going to be limited by that no matter what the feed is.
Right, and
so I realized like it was less of a social media platform
Right.
and more of like a mini television type platform. So you would go and the creators and more of the
it
professionals.
was more
were
like
putting
almost like
stuff
a
out there.
BuzzFeed created an app and they hired these stars to like put content out. Like there wasn't a lot of the average social media consumer was not posting the Vine on a regular basis.
Correct, but I also do think that there was some like the What Are Those Vine.
Yeah.
I mean, that was not like a professional content creator. That was just some Joe Schmo who had one
Right.
Vine that he was
And
creating.
that went viral.
Yeah, so like the viral nature of things tended to take off more on Vine, and I did think that with 6-second clips, it was a good platform. I thought that I feel like if I owned Vine and I didn't have all the other stuff going on with Twitter, if you and I had Vine from the infancy, would we have been able to earn money on that platform? I think the answer is yes. I just don't think that Twitter, was able to scale back enough and just focus independently on Vine and monetizing. They wanted it to be like a value add to Twitter. And so because of that, it wound up just losing the money.
But even our clients would say that they looked at Vine as a publishing partner with Twitter. It wasn't a standalone like Instagram and Facebook. There may be people out there that don't know that Facebook actually owns Instagram. It's that separate.
Right.
Vine was something that you can use for high quality clips and the 6-second loop. And remember, it's everything loops now, but back in the day, Vine was the only platform that looped, and that was kind of a new, fresh thing. I just don't think Twitter integrated it within their main app, and they probably should have done it earlier because, like you said, Vine as a standalone app wasn't the monster that Instagram is right now.
Yeah, and you're right in that all of our clients basically said, like, look, we just use Vine as a video to share to Twitter.
Exactly.
But we'll
The
almost
same way
do that as
people
like a highlight dump.
The same way people used to use TwitPic or the way they use YouTube
Yeah.
to share to Twitter and, that type of thing.
Yeah, because we would just dump every single highlight, and then the ones that were good, we would share
Right.
to Twitter.
And that's how they actually got the viral part of it is when people would, put it on Twitter or other platforms and then it would just, go crazy.
The Periscope, I do think that was a failure by not immediately integrating Periscope into Twitter.
Right.
To where you were just, I'm on Twitter and I'm live right now. If they had done that prior to Facebook Live, because there was probably maybe a month or two.
Well, then you see Facebook now when you open up your mobile app, there's just a live button. You press it and you're live within. Same with Instagram. I mean, you're live within 3 seconds. 3, 2, 1, you're live.
Yeah.
So, yeah, I think Periscope, you've always mentioned this too, is that they were the first in the game. If they would have integrated it immediately, and when you opened up your Twitter mobile app, you just press live, I think they would have potentially changed the game.
Yeah, I mean, it would have been first to market. People would have signed up, even if it was a brief sign up until Facebook would have gotten live and stopped that flood from people coming over.
But think about it. Facebook Live is like the big thing right now, and they have their billboards, and I actually have a story that I want to talk about. But Twitter came out with Periscope over a year ago. They could have had that same type of marketing campaign and go live and download the app and one button, push the live and broadcast. But Facebook just came in and marketed better and had a better platform.
Yeah, and it's just I think it's an example of, Twitter has a decent long-term plan, and in a vacuum, they would be very successful. But when they're competing with companies as
do they
aggressive,
have a decent long-term plan?
I mean, if in a vacuum, if Facebook wasn't around and they weren't like, siphoning off some of those services, but Facebook...
Yeah, but you always have competitors in any market.
Yeah, but I mean, Facebook is incredibly aggressive. I even think both you and I, or at least I was shocked that Facebook used Instagram to completely pick off what Snapchat was doing successfully. So that's something where Snapchat was more successful in growing and chipping away. But we've talked about this previously. Facebook was so successful in copycatting what Snapchat was doing that they slowed that, and they've just been, they've been better at doing that. Facebook has been more successful at really undercutting what Twitter is trying to do. As soon as they come up with a unique feature, Facebook duplicates, puts out a better marketing campaign behind it, floods it to their users, and then people just don't have a reason to leave Facebook because they were there in the first place. So, yeah, who knows? But that's my prediction. There's going to be some sort of sale of Twitter, less in the $14 billion range and something much lower in 2017.
Well, I will go to this then. I read an article on Mashable calling going live on Facebook is actually the worst. And just talks about how Facebook's going all in on their marketing campaign. There's billboards at the airport now that say, while you're waiting for your luggage, why don't you go live? And they're trying to tell everybody that's a user of Facebook, like you can go live too and make that a great piece of content. But I guess what kind of makes me eerie about this whole like everybody go live more so than maybe just a select few or maybe celebrities or what have you is what's going to happen. And it's kind of already happened, right? I think there was a situation where a cop shot somebody and the girlfriend Facebook live the whole thing. But what happens when there's no filter, right? In TV, in the history of media, there's always been a select few that are able to broadcast live into people's homes, and there's tape delays. The whole Janet Jackson thing with the Justin Timberlake developed a tape delay so nothing would get out there that potentially could be harmful to kids or what have you. But what happens when all these people start going live and there's suicide and homicide and there's no delay and all you need is a cell phone? You don't have to go through the FCC. You don't have to be a broadcaster. You don't have to be a multi-million-dollar company to afford the cameras. All you have to have is a $200 cell phone, and now you're a broadcast provider that can, like you mentioned with the what are those, can go viral, even if you don't have a lot of friends. I mean, what starts to happen when everybody in America has a potential to go live at any point?
I would argue that that's the most exciting part about the entire going live feature to me, is that previously, media and who was able to have a voice was very controlled, and it cost a lot of money.
Right.
So in the same way that digital music has made such an impact, positively and negatively, for the music industry, because now in order to make an album and to get out there, it costs a few $100.
Yeah, true.
I mean, you can get a cheap MacBook and GarageBand, and you can really be making, the types of music that 25 years ago was state of the art. So to be able to go live now without having to go through the FCC, which I'm not a fan of. I'm not a fan of the FCC because I think it does more harm.
But I guess if you're Zuckerberg at Facebook, are you worried about the potential that a semi-celebrity hangs himself on Facebook Live or shoots himself?
Sure, but...
And then do you just say that's part of the game, it's going to happen?
I mean, that happened on Periscope. Do you remember there was a disgruntled news reporter that murdered two people while there was a live broadcast going, and he periscoped the whole thing? That was a huge shock. It sent those ripples around. In my opinion, the act itself is really bad. It's not the fact that it was like live and showing it. Could it maybe encourage more people to do it because of the viewership? Possibly. I mean, there's been occasions where people have, killed themselves in stadiums and stuff like that just so that more people see it. So there's that possible negative effect, but I think overwhelming the positive impact of being able to let anybody with a voice has the exact same capabilities of broadcasting, so that
much like the whole what happened on Twitter and the whole Egypt situation, which you were...
It was huge. Yeah. I mean, that was really important, and it helped people feel like, I don't want to speak for the Egyptian people, but in general, you knew that there were a lot of people that were with you, and there was a lot of people that were going out. And so the conversation, even if you were in different parts of the city, you knew like, hey, it's going off all around here. So that global communication, the ability for people to broadcast, and I think what it'll wind up doing is giving rise to better content overall, because the cream will rise and you won't have to go to American Idol. If you're a really amazing performer and you start performing in the same way that YouTube led to...
But what's different from that than just having video? Like, why does that have to be live?
I don't think...
If you're a performer...
I don't think if it has to be live that it's, necessarily, a lot better. But what it does is cuts away from production value. Because even something like a YouTube video... You're very capable of doing that. You had a computer, you had different stuff. Now, there's no production that's needed. You don't have to have Final Cut. You don't have to upload.
Yeah, but you can do that.
Anything.
You can do that the same thing with just record on your camera roll, right?
And then upload to YouTube. But I'm saying, like, you can just turn it on and talk. So the live element, I do think, is really important. If you want to be a news reporter and report from the scene of something and you just want to get out there and do it, you can now.
Well,
there's less barriers.
The whole point in this article is, bottom line, it's just not necessary usually. Saying 99% of the time, there's people that, you can go live all day long, but a lot of the content's going to be boring, lame.
But a lot of the content is boring from professional news outlets anyway.
True.
But yeah, I think it's exciting. I think it's really cool. I think we're going to see more,
Like, but you
just there's less of a barrier to entry for somebody who wants to do.
I'm with you
a
on
live
that. I just
broadcast.
think that, the FCC or what have you, like before, they never had to worry about anybody in the world going live at any time. This is opening up a whole Pandora's box of technically 300 million people or whatever in the United States with a cell phone can in fact go live and broadcast whatever they want and say whatever they want, and that can cause an issue, especially when you're talking about cyber warfare and hacking. Someone can hack the Rock's account and immediately be broadcasting live to 150 million people and have those people see content that could be
right. But I mean, but in that scenario, the FCC wouldn't be able to stop that anyway.
No, but I'm saying 25 years ago, what are you going to hijack ABC Newsroom and tell everybody to turn the cameras on and get your buddies?
Right.
I mean, it was just so much more difficult to get a neo-Nazi or ISIL type of statement out to the masses. But now I think with the right hacking or what have you, it's very easy to get a hold of a huge audience. And
yeah, so I mean, in that way, I agree with you that it presents a lot of issues, and there's some major landmines. But I do think overall,
yeah, but I'm not saying
being able to have like a voice.
Yeah,
for
my
as
argument
many people
isn't
as
they
possible.
shouldn't do live because that could be a possibility. I think that'd be 0.001% of the possibility of people doing great things with the live platform. But if I'm Mark Zuckerberg and you talk about PR and things like that, that could be something that they may have to answer in the next few months. Once everybody starts going live, there may be some big stories out there.
And something that Zuckerberg has been dealing with after the election has been how do you deal with fake news?
Right.
And the word propaganda seems very 1940s, but in other countries there have been media outlets who have been channels for propaganda that have led to terrible, violence and stuff like that in Rwanda and other places.
What if you get a propaganda?
If you really do get a lot of people and they're watching you live every day, and
Yeah.
you become this really negative
that and
force,
also
then the FCC can't really do anything about it, but then is now Zuckerberg.
That's what I'm saying. Does
Yeah.
Facebook now have to come and say, that is not cool, you cannot broadcast that to our audience? Like that causes kind of a big brother issue too.
Right. And are you saying that because it's live, it's harder to manage that?
Well, how do you know? Like if someone's...
Right. Well, but I mean, if you just put a video up, you don't
I know, but if
either.
you're live and you're shooting execution style, 18 people on a line, boom, 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 at what point does Facebook get alerted? Like there's somebody murdering people on the Rock's account. They just hacked the Rock's account at 150, what do you do? So I don't know how you build that infrastructure to avoid those situations. Maybe you say it is what it is, but in the history of our medium, nobody has ever had the access to broadcast that many people live whenever they want if they have the right infrastructure.
Right.
So.
And that really does kind of come back now that we're talking it out to the same issue of I'm not a big fan of the FCC because they're the ones that say what is good and what is bad, and I think that sometimes has a negative effect, and that's why maybe in the United States we see women's breasts as being overtly sexual, and in France they're on billboards and it's not as big of a deal.
Yeah.
And that has to do with like how we control what is good and what is bad and what is decent and what is not. But if the FCC's not doing it and you get those types of issues,
well, because like
then at what point if there's a big neo-Nazi influencer on Facebook and they've got 20 million people watching on a regular basis, who's in charge then? Because is it Zuckerberg because it's his platform? Does the FCC have oversight there?
You made a point at one point about how you want to be warned of something. If you're at work, sometimes you don't want to see certain things, or somebody like falling down on a skateboard and knocking themselves unconscious. Like, I'm not in the mood to see this. And I think, just how do you, when it's live, when it's video, maybe you have some type of mechanism or some type of bot that can see, I don't know. But I just don't know how you police that when everything's going live.
Yeah. And I mean, that conversation came out of the whole like trigger warning conversation where one of our employees mentioned that the trigger warning thing is just to let people know like, hey, if this includes, a really graphic scene of violence, you may not want to look at it.
If you go back to 2001, you knew as a viewer inside your house that if I turn on ABC, it's not going to be 18 people being murdered. I know that there's either journalistic integrity, there's FCC, there's rules, there's guidelines, there's only a select few of broadcasters, so they're not going to throw away their whole company to broadcast something that would be awful to most of the audience. So, it's opening up a can of worms for sure.
Yeah, interesting.
All right, so one real quick thing I wanted to talk about with you is Amazon. They patent a floating warehouse in the sky, which I thought was interesting. And Mike, we have a few photos here that we can show on Facebook Live. But not only, that's not even on the ground. That's a 45,000 foot or a blimp that would be circling at 45,000 feet, launching drone orders A lot of it would be like floating over a football stadium and delivering items down to the tailgaters, things like that. But although this may never happen, or it may be at this point, a long ways away, Amazon deciding that, hey, let's patent it anyway, just in case we have the technology to do this. So pretty incredible stuff where we're going and where we're headed.
If you look at any movie about the future, you'll notice there's a lot more stuff in the sky in every single one of those movies. So I don't know if that has any real impact on what's going to be, but I'm excited when I see stuff like that. I'm not like, oh my God, that's so crazy, like it's going to change things.
But when our parents were kids, they would watch movies. They would have bet on the fact that by the year 2000, there'd be flying cars. So you wonder, like when we look at something like that, is that like 2090 or 2000 whatever, or is it 7 years away? Who knows?
I mean, the technology, all of that technology exists right now.
Right.
We have drones, we have blimps. There are cities. If they really wanted to do that, for the Super Bowl or for the World Cup or something, as long as they were to be able to get access, I think a company like Amazon could get something like that together in about 6 months. You buy a blimp and you get a bunch of stuff inside of it and get your drones in there.
Pretty incredible.
So yeah, there's no lack of technology preventing them from getting there quickly. But it reminds me a little bit too of Facebook has been looking to launch blimps and satellites to where they can project Wi-Fi to parts of the world that don't already have it.
Yeah.
Love that idea.
Yeah.
So I'm all in on these tech companies trying and being experimental and weird, even if some of it fails. But I do think that, in this generation, it's going to be these companies that are going to push the limits and the boundaries of what's possible rather than the government. I think it's pretty clear, probably under a Trump administration.
And even in this article on CNN, they said one of the problems is plane or cargo. I was like, you could figure that out. Well, you don't have to be right in the middle of a space where the plane's going to fly into it. So
yeah,
I mean, with that, stadium,
and with that, line of thinking, the thought that you can have that many aircrafts flying all around the world at any one time and not running into each other in air traffic control. It's like, they're smart enough people to be able to figure out the logistics portion of it. So if that's the only issue, then I assume that they'll be able to have these in the next several years.
Right. All right. So we'll go into what we learned this week as entrepreneurs. I'll throw it to you.
So this is a running theme that we've been talking about a lot, which is, all about scale and delegation. And I think what I've learned is it's not so much about delegation as it is about trust. You have to learn how to trust your team. In order to trust those people, you have to hire people that you feel are trustworthy and then give them an opportunity to succeed or fail. So it took, and I don't want to speak for you, but I think it took
Please don't speak for me.
I think it took both of us getting to a point where we were like, getting towards burnout a little bit, maybe even if it's only 15%, but both of us were exhausted and we just had conversations where it's like, I had too much to do to help you. You had too much to do to help me. And we were both just like, well, I'm going to have to give it to somebody because, we got to the point where we just really felt like it's at the point now where we need to be able to give some of this work away. And then if the worst case scenario happens, then there's a major flaw in what we're doing.
Yeah.
And what happened? It's better.
Yeah.
It's better. So we trusted people, or at least I did. I trusted certain people to handle certain projects, and they did better than I could because they brought fresh
or better than you anticipated. Yeah, I think in the beginning you think like, what if they messed it up? But it's like at a certain point you have to. We kind of had this weird conclusion at around the same week, which I thought was kind of odd. But I think we both were like, if we pass this on to our trusted employees that have been with us for years, some of them, and they blow up this account, we got to take it on the chin, man. It is what it is at this point. What's the alternative? Like, when you have 20 employees and you have these people that you trust and trained and what have you, and you give them a responsibility and the client fires you because it doesn't have the David and Brett special touch, well, then we've built the company. We've built a wrong.
It's not a company.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah. It's like me and you doing a bunch of work and then we have to have a few people help us, but that's not scalable and it's not really a good company.
And the only way to test case that is to give people that responsibility, and if everybody fires you, then you say, wow, that sucked. Let's build back up and find out we could not do that again. But I don't know how else to test case it unless you actually give people the responsibility.
But I mean, a lot of that is nerve-wracking, and I can think back to conversations where we said we have to be able to scale and let people do stuff, but what we didn't do is just give it to someone, give them the tools they needed, and step back a little bit and
That's hard for any entrepreneur, though, right? Because usually
super
it's
difficult. It took 3.5 years.
But for any entrepreneur, usually entrepreneurs are type A personalities, and I think it's just tough. It's tough to give something that's kind of out of your control and hope for the best, because in any relationship or business, especially for people like us, it's tough to just like rely on somebody else because you've been burned so many times in the past by people you've relied on, right?
Yeah, and I think, in the early stages, neither of us really took much time off, and we were both incredibly involved in every single client. But then when I left to go on a vacation.
Were you first, or was I? I think you did.
I was first because I went to when I got engaged.
Yeah, but why are you just laughing?
Because that was the first time I left at all, and I was really nervous about it. And
I was too, but then we got through it like, oh, that was fine.
Yeah. And then I bet that you probably had a similar anxiety when you left for Greece, especially because the timing was like.
Well, then I came back though, and you closed like 5 deals like without my help, and I'm like, wow, everything kept on rolling.
And the other project was like super successful, so initially it was even tough for us to trust each other. Really.
True.
And it took like I'm not going to be here. And then we got back, and it's like, oh, look.
And we both did a good job.
Everything's fine.
There was a few things that happened during those first vacations of our company that definitely probably could have warranted a phone call. Like, hey, man, I just want to get your thoughts. We're like, he's not here. I'm not going to involve him. I can handle this.
Yeah.
And then it gave us, the person coming back from vacation, that much more, ability to say, wow, it still was running without me here 24/7.
Right. And that was just one of those things where early stages, the only people we really trusted to be able to do that was each other. But now we're starting to realize there's really talented people surrounding us that we can trust with different projects, and it's working well. So that was what I learned. Learn to trust your team, and all right, it works.
I'm going to kind of wrap what we're reading and what we learned this week as entrepreneurs into one, because it kind of talks about the same thing. So, read another chapter.
All right.
Yesterday, Jim Collins, Good to Great, and this was the chapter, A Culture of Discipline. So, how do you avoid the entrepreneurial death spiral as you grow and scale, which is the tough part, right? Because you have that ability early on where you can be super flexible. You don't have to have all these restrictions and these clock out procedures and SOWs and invoices and contracts. But as you grow, you have to do that to protect what you're doing, because one client or one employee can totally take advantage of you. But he said some really cool things. I'm not sure if you remember this chapter in particular, but most companies build their bureaucratic rules to manage a small percentage of wrong people on the bus, which in turn drives away the right people on the bus. So more to your point, if you have the right people, then you can give them the responsibility. They'll do just fine. But if you have the wrong people, you feel like you have to put all these shackles and systems and workflows in place so they don't screw it up. In reality, what you're doing is you're trying to turn a wrong person into the right person. That's always impossible.
I totally agree. It's a learning process going through this, because I can think back to conversations that I had with you where I've said things that were totally different from how I feel now, and I meant them, and I thought they were true at the time. Just where I felt, I think sometimes. Let me try and summarize this. So, in one of the previous things I said, like, read all these case studies, look at all these different articles, but trust your gut. What I would do is sometimes I'd read a case study of something that was successful, and I would say, the Wells Fargo method, where they are incredibly
profit
tight
per
on
employee and all that.
Well, but like in their training too.
Yeah.
Like they'll have a manager behind a teller, and that manager may provide advice like every few minutes to the person that's there, because they want that person and they want the experience to be identical across the board. And then at Yard House, you and I, a restaurant that both of us worked, they really had a good training program where there was an answer to every question and everybody knew exactly how to do everything. So in certain senses, I wanted to have everything super tight-knit to where there was an answer to every question. But I'm starting to feel like now, and this may change in the future, but with our industry, because we're not providing the exact same service, and because we haven't been doing it that much and it changes all the time, that the premium isn't in the training of the individual. The premium is in the individual. So we have to make really good hires for people that are super smart and flexible.
And what I took away from this chapter was fill the culture with self-disciplined people who are willing to go to extreme lengths to fulfill their responsibilities. So that endures that culture of discipline you're talking about. And Yeah, I mean, you shouldn't have to have a 97-point checklist to get a disciplined individual. That should be innately, if you hire the right people, you don't have to always have a system or procedure for absolutely everything, because that would be almost impossible to create.
Right. And what I think it does, too, is it puts the obligation to decide exactly how to do things into either one person's hand or a small group of people, where I'd rather see it a little bit spread out to where everybody does it differently, and then look and say, like, the way that this person does this is really awesome.
But you had that same issue with trying to scale the sales department. You were saying this is how we email clients, and at a certain point, you're like, well, everybody has a different voice. Everybody has a different way they're going to do things. As long as it's professional, as long as they get to the point from point A to point B, that's okay. And that kind of took a little bit for you to not realize, like, it doesn't have to be A, B, C, D, E, F. It's someone can, if as long as they get to point A to point Z, they can have a little bit of their own
right.
Own
and
process
we've always vocally said this, but we never want to be seen as like the guys who have all the ideas, and then everyone is just here to support us. So to really, be true to that and say, like, here's some boundaries.
Right.
We don't want to be weird. We, double check your spelling.
Right.
Don't send the wrong stuff. Like, make sure you do attachments, like that kind of very loose boundary. But within that, if you're going to have a relationship with a client, be yourself, because then it's genuine. Vanessa, one of our employees, is very, not bubbly, I would say, but like super enthusiastic and super fun on the phone. Totally different from the way that I would interact with a client. So
it gets the same deal done. Yeah.
Right. If I listed out the Brett's way to interact with clients, it wouldn't feel. Right. It would feel not genuine. It would make her feel awkward and like bumbly because she wouldn't know how to do it.
This chapter in particular, he shows the example of like a pilot. Right. There's like 150 different knobs that he has to know. There's different procedures, air traffic control, different things you have to do. Am I ready for takeoff? Am I clear? Those are all strict boundaries that you can never go outside. However, if you're going in for a landing and the wind comes through, the pilot has to make a decision. Should I try to land this puppy or take a loop and do it again? And that's the most important part, because if you don't have that self-disciplined pilot to make some of those own decisions, you can have all the checklists in the world. Well, I was clear for landing, so I'm just going to land, and then you kill 250 people. So you have to have people that can think on their own.
Yeah, and you can train so far, but in those circumstances, what will happen is, unless you really give somebody the authority and say, I trust you completely, then you're going to wind up with, hey, David, real quick. Hey, David, real quick. Hey, can you read this email? Hey, should I do this? Hey, should I do that? And then if you can really get to a point where you say, and you've done this recently, where you're just like, I trust you.
Yeah, exactly.
Send the email. Like, you're going to be, the project more than me. My insight's not going to be as super
They call that you just can't be killed by the God-a-minute meetings, which I've heard a lot.
Yeah, but I mean, it really is. It takes a lot of time to get to the point where you trust, because even 6 months ago, you may have been like, let me see that email before you send it.
Right.
And now it's more of just send the thing. What's the worst that can happen? So.
Also, one thing he said towards the end was create a stop doing list, which I think we've kind of done recently, rather than a to-do list. Essentially, stop doing the wrong things. So I think if you list that out sometimes, or you think it out, you stop doing the things that are not so good. All right, so moving on to our tech tip. I will go first.
Okay.
Mike, if you can throw up the tech tip Twitter image that I was looking at. So just looking at Christmas, first of all, Fitbit, as they always do, did really well on Christmas. #1 app in the App Store. I bought 2 Fitbits for my mom and dad, which is funny, but that was #1. People downloading the app. And then if you look at this, I think 15, 16, 17, 18, all VR, virtual reality, Google Cardboard, Discovery VR, VR Horror. So a lot of kids and gift givers giving out those VR headsets this Christmas season. I was trying to look up how the trajectory of what happens on Christmas and how that kind of makes technology go forward, because I think when new things come out, Christmas is a time that it goes out in a large scale. But we'll see if this big spike on Christmas time gets more people involved in the VR space and more comfortable. I had the VR headset at my Christmas get-together, and my 83-year-old grandpa has a VR headset. So I think people now are actually using it and having the ability to say how cool this is. So once in my opinion, version 2, version 3, or version 4 prototype of the VR headset starts to come out and it's a little more consumer friendly, I think people will at least know, I've tried one of those, or I know somebody that has one. I really like what that's all about.
Yeah, and I feel like the combination, because Samsung has the headset now, and you can get, just about any of the Samsung phones and get VR.
Well, Google Cardboard, too, you can put in a lot of different phones.
Right. But like, I mean, if you go and buy a Samsung, they probably are giving away that actual, headset thing if you buy a new
It's
Note
only
or something.
$50 or something.
Yeah, so around the holiday, I would assume that a lot of people got Samsung phones, a lot of people got headsets.
And a lot of people got the Amazon Echo, the whole Alexa
Yep.
and some of those Google Home things, which we can talk about. But that's I think that's the future, is the virtual reality and also the robot assistant that helps you turn your lights off, remember things, and give you daily inspiration if you need it.
Right, but the VR portion of it, I do think that the more, I guess, like typical standard companies are offering something like that. Like, I'm not going to go out and buy a VR headset, but if you already have a Samsung phone and it's like another $50 to get it, or maybe you get it free with your purchase, then it's a lot easier to say like, oh, I'm going to go try it out rather than going and spending.
But right now, I
$300
totally look
separately.
at it as we do it for like our initiation around the office. When we get new employees, they have to go through a haunted house on our VR headset. Just kind of a fun thing we do. But for me, it was totally like a party gag thing. Like, it was a Christmas party. Hey, Grandpa, try this. Hey, cousin, try this. More so than something I would put on my head every single day or once a week or anything like that.
Yeah, but a lot of these types of products are driven not by, people in their 30s, but like by 13, 15, 17-year-olds who maybe are just sitting in their room all the time. And it's like, normally they'd be on Facebook, but if there's a certain segment of people who'd rather put the headset on and play a game or take a tour of Italy, that's where I think those are going to be really important, is that younger generation who's got all the time in the world.
Just like we grew up with N64s and the whole deal.
Yeah, because I mean, really, the product is important for the people that have the time to use it.
Yeah.
And so if you've got a ton of time and VR is interesting, then it means it's valuable to people that have a ton of time on their hands, in the same way that I probably wouldn't play World of Warcraft, but I'd love to have owned it.
And you and I have talked about how 360 is still not there. It's still in the infant stages as far as just the overall product. It looks pretty cool, but once they get to like full 4K immersion and not a bunch of, what do they call it? The
stitching.
Yeah, the whole stitching issues. Once that happens, then those VR type of scenarios look so much better and so much more realer, I think, and that may just skyrocket it. But I really think it's still, everything's in its infant stages. But when you see that type of boom in the App Store on Christmas, you understand that this may be going trajectory and upwards.
And now Live 360 on Periscope.
Yes.
Which is interesting. So I think it was 2 weeks or maybe 3 weeks ago, Facebook did a world first.
And Twitter has finally, I think, brought Periscope into its parent,
Yeah, I don't know why that took so long.
I know.
But yeah, so I did see somebody on Twitter with Periscope doing a Live 360. I think that was their first. Facebook rolled it out with National Geographic as part of like a Mars rover, people coming out. And then YouTube has had it for some time now.
Yeah, I think, and then I was thinking about this too. Once it becomes something where everybody can broadcast in 360, meaning like they create a 360 camera like the ball pin of a pen, that like goes on everybody's cell phone or is part of your cell phone camera, then I think it's going to go absolutely nuts. But right now, when you still have to buy the 6 GoPros or buy the 360 rig, it's still a commercial type item more than a consumer item.
Yeah, or like maybe prosumer at this point, kind of like where a GoPro is, but not everybody's going to have it. But I do think that pretty soon it's going to be a lot less about, ooh, look at this new cool feature that I have that I can show people. Because in the past, like 360 has been a real value add or a standalone product that we've been able to sell our clients. It's going to go away soon. And then it's going to be like, okay, you can do aerial very easily. You can do 360 very easily. You can do underwater. You can do live. All that stuff is cheap and free. And it's just a matter of what are you going to do with it? Where's the content?
And the way any of that stuff scales is if it's already in your pocket and you own it, and then you can activate it, then you're good. So the reason why...
That's the reason there's no digital cameras.
Yeah, but the reason why... and the reason why Snapchat has done so well, you don't have to buy like a device that you put over your phone to do the lenses or anything like that. It just automatically in the UI. So I think any of this stuff that's going to start scaling, it has to be already on your iPhone 8 or 9 or whatever it will be at that point.
Yeah, but if I'm a media company, I'm getting more and more worried because for so long you've had the monopoly on the broadcast and the equipment and all this stuff. And now, there's just no distance between human being with something to say or something to do and putting it out there. If we wanted to on a cell phone with some okay lighting, we could do an entire play, like live play or a live performance or whatever. So as a media company,
And we've seen those.
I'm kind of worried because it's like the monopoly on getting that stuff out there and the equipment.
But we've seen those small
cheap.
steps already, like with Justin Bieber on YouTube. Before, if Justin Bieber was born 20 years before, he would have to have his mom, knock down the doors of different record companies and hope that the vice president would take a listen to her son.
And before that, he would have had to go knock on the doors of a recording studio and said, "Hey, how much money is it going to take me to record a song?"
No
They're
way.
going to say, "Well, you got to hire the drummer and the guitar player and all these people."
So
and
$10,000 later,
yeah, like $7,500 to have a stack of CDs or tapes to be
and
able to
then
go
hope
and give
that
people.
the VP listens to it and then gives you a shot.
Yeah,
But YouTube changed the game. But to your point, yeah, I mean, we were talking about this earlier in the show, but before there was, 3 or 4 major news networks that would tell you your news every day. Now, potentially, every human being in America with a cell phone has that same exact right and technology to go live and broadcast what they want to broadcast.
totally agree. It's interesting. So one thing that's off topic kind of, but when you mentioned the news networks, it brought this up. Number 3 cable network is HGTV.
Is
which
that
I found
right?
incredible. Behind only Fox News, and
CNN.
ESPN.
ESPN. HGTV.
HGTV is beating out CNN. And HGTV, I don't know if you've watched
TNT.
if you
TBS.
watch their shows, but I bring this up all the time. I like with our existing equipment set up and our skill set, we could shoot a HGTV show. The production value is super, limited, and they just do all these shows about fixing up houses and
Buying houses.
and all this stuff.
remodels and backyard stuff.
But it's so easy to have on the background. It requires there's no emotional roller coasters. There's no
and even me,
drama.
I don't own a home or a big backyard, but I've watched multiple of like the dude goes to Home Depot like, "Hey, you want a free backyard?"
Yeah,
I'm
or
like,
and Flip or Flop is this
Yeah.
huge smash hit, Property Brothers. So I'm pretty surprised that HGTV, and they're owned by Scripps.
there's something like psychologically that people love about the before and after picture. And I think with HGTV, it's like, here's a big piece of dirt, and then here's a waterfall with all this beautiful grass and plants, like,
Right.
because you're always waiting for the end of how it looks and compared to what it looked like. And I think people are drawn to that.
And in the U.S., I think 99% of people would say that they're either going to buy a house,
Yeah, or they
at
already
some
have
point
a
in time,
house.
or they already have a house and would think about a remodel, or are going to buy another house if they're already in a house. So like, it kind of works for everybody.
Well,
So-
even like, it's Exhibit Pit My Ride on MTV. Like, when I watched it was like when you're in high school and you're talking about, I want to
well,
get new rims.
cars,
and I want to
cars are pretty important.
Yeah, but I want to get new rims. I want to get what's the thing on the back of your car, like the
Spoiler.
Spoiler. I want to get a new spoiler. So that show was kind of funny. You get an old, 1993 beat up Civic, and Exhibit comes through and
Yeah.
hooks it up.
Yeah, put a DJ booth in your trunk.
Yeah, exactly. Your tech tip.
My tech tip. You may have brought this up in a previous episode,
Stealing my
but
tech tip.
can you bring this up, Mike? I gave you a link to it. It is the
So we're
optional
looking-
feature called Nearby Friends on Facebook.
Well,
So
Uber,
you brought up something about Uber where you can say like you allow me to know your location,
Yep.
and instead of saying let's meet here,
Right.
I can just say wherever he is, that's where I'd like to go, which is nice. Facebook now has something called Nearby Friends where if you opt to turn it on, and if you can scroll down a little bit to
this
the
is on
second
Facebook
images,
Live. We're looking at this.
he can't scroll down. So anyway, you can get notifications that would say David Brickley and 5 more friends are nearby you.
Huh.
And then you can open that up and see where those people are. I see a lot of failed relationships in the future based off of
Well,
this
is
feature.
just, and I mean, this feature has been live for a long time with options like Foursquare and different apps that allowed you. But yeah, you have to enable it. But yeah, if a lot of people enable it, you can see where people are at.
Yeah, and this is something where I can see the value in it. Like, let's say you're at Coachella or something like that, and you want to be able to.
I don't know what app-
everybody meet up.
I don't know what app we use, but I was on like a Vegas trip with 10 of my buddies like 4 years ago, and we downloaded the app and we all enabled the geo-target because we stayed at different hotels.
Right.
So instead of texting everybody, where you at, where you at, where you at, where you at, you could just look like, oh, he's downstairs or he's in this casino.
Right.
I'm going to call him, but not call my other friend who's way down the street at MGM or what have you.
And what's funny to me about that is how quickly, I guess maybe not super quickly, but over my lifetime, how the meeting up with people has changed so drastically. Because I can, if you can believe it, remember a time prior to cell phones where you would tell somebody where you're going to meet them, and then if you didn't see them there, you'd wait around for a while, and then maybe you'd go to a payphone and call their house and be like, did they leave yet?
Ugh.
And that was how we would meet people. And finding a location, I'd have to ask the directions to a place that I was going, and they'd say, get off at exit this, and then go 2 miles, and I'd write it all down. And now, even what you described, the whole texting back and forth, like, where are you?
That's
and, like,
annoying.
turn left. That even seems, like, archaic.
Yeah.
Like, why would we go through all that? Why can't I just have my GPS honing device tell me where to walk down the street and know exactly the street I'm
Nuts.
on? Yeah, so it's pretty amazing that technology.
But I would
moves
ask my
this fast.
parents that all the time, like back in 1970 or whatever. Like, what'd you guys do? Like, hey, Brett, let's go meet and have a drink at 5 o'clock, and it's 5:20. A lot of times you call the establishment, like, hey, Brett, there's a call for you at the bar.
Yeah.
And then here's Dave, like, hey, sorry, brother, I just jumped in the shower running late or whatever.
Yeah.
But that, I mean, I think back then it wasn't as abnormal, but now, like, after 15 minutes, you're texting the person, like, where are you at?
Right. But like little small features like this that, almost everybody in the United States has Facebook, even if they're not active. But now that little value add is my aunt going to use that a little more frequently when she goes to ball games to meet up with people.
But that's what
possibly.
Zuckerberg is doing, like, with Facebook Messenger, how he bought WhatsApp, and what he's doing with Instagram. Like, he's getting all these really cool apps, and he's finding a way to just put it all under one umbrella. So that technology, what you're talking about, you may have just came across that, but that technology's been live for 4 or 5 years.
But I'm not going to go and download that from like another platform.
Exactly. So if he puts it all under one umbrella, someone like you is like, oh, that's cool, I'll enable that, but you would never go out and seek that app.
Yeah.
So he's finding a way to put it all under one roof.
And what's nice about it is these are, everybody's looking at millennials, but there's still a huge portion of older people that are going to be using Facebook over these other platforms, and they're still spending money, so that's an important segment still. Anyway, when I went to my wedding, which was not in the U.S., so no one had service,
yes, interesting.
I was kind of thinking like, man, shit, should I get a plan? And this is me thinking this, like I should be the one telling everybody else.
Right.
But I got there, and then I'm getting pinged on Facebook Messenger from everybody because Wi-Fi was free at the resort, and then people are calling me on Facebook Messenger, and then we were in a big group chat, and everybody was talking, and it was all communication was exclusively through Facebook Messenger. And you know what? Everybody had Facebook.
Yep.
If we tried any other platform,
nope.
Would everybody there have had it? I don't think so.
And kind of that point, a couple of years ago, Tyson, who we've worked with in Australia.
Yes.
I was driving down the freeway from LA to San Diego on Skype on my phone, talking to Tyson in Australia, the clearest phone call I've ever been on, going 70 miles down the freeway. Like, that's insane.
Yeah.
I was just telling John about that on the way back from LA yesterday. I'm like, I still look back at that moment like, this is crazy.
Yeah.
16-hour difference in Australia on Skype, on 4G, going down the freeway. That's that's where we are.
I did the same thing when I lived out of the country and I was still with Corinne, who's at the time was just my girlfriend. I was looking into all these different plans and calling cards and everything else. I was like, this is absurd. There's got to be an easier way. So I looked at Skype. Skype had a really inexpensive monthly plan that was unlimited, and it was I'm talking really cheap, like $5 or $6.
Yeah, it's like $10.
And then I bought what was it called?
It's a Skype phone number, right?
Yeah, but what was the iPhone that wasn't an actual phone?
Oh, iTouch.
I guess like an iTouch. It was like the size of a phone. It's basically like an iPod with Wi-Fi.
iTouch.
Yeah, so I bought an iTouch, and I had Wi-Fi enabled. But I had Wi-Fi enabled on the bus from my dorm to the university. And so I was in Egypt, like in the full-on desert, and I could call the U.S. on Skype from a phone that costs $150. It was incredible. So there's a lot of new technology that makes communication a lot easier.
All right, so moving on to our current business goals. Throw it to you.
Current business goals for me. So really wanted to dive in now that we're at year's end, dig into the numbers, and do a much better job of forecasting. I think there's a million areas in Salesforce that I haven't really utilized, and by doing that, it'll make my life easier, and then as we scale up the sales side, it'll be less of how am I going to manage a sales staff, and more of, hey, I'm already doing this here. I need to place 1, 2, and 3 people in these areas, and then, these are your numbers, these are your forecasts, so excited to dive into Salesforce.
And we did that a little bit, which
more.
Was interesting. You went through the numbers and said, okay, based on all our clients thus far, what percentage are we working in production, percentage in social strategy, percentage in what have you, sports, live coverage. That was even interesting to look at, and that was just very small. Took you an hour to do, but I agree. If we dig more into it, it's going to be just open up a lot more.
Yeah, because even if the numbers maybe don't provide too much insight, like to be able to dig in and find something and say, well, this is interesting. This particular client is way more profitable than all the rest.
And we talked about, too, it'd be nice to have like a financial auditor or an outside person look at our books and just see if anything is a red flag or see if anything is something we're not taking advantage of. It would just be interesting to get a total biased person come in here and say, like, what are you doing that for? And and maybe they're totally wrong. You and I agree, like, we're not taking your advice, but just to get a different guy that's not looking at it every day.
Yep.
All right. So for me, much what I said last show was just 2017 STN original content. I think we talked about a little bit in the break room yesterday. It starts with this podcast, sitting down and setting a budget or allocating resources to it and deciding how we want to double down on what we're doing with this and different platforms, which we're starting to do with like our My Fitness channel. But yeah, I think we have to have a plan, have to have resources, have to have some type of budget and a little bit of hierarchy to what we're doing. So in 2017, the original part of it can really
By the way, what happened? I thought we were going to do a My Fitness.
That's next after the
that's
New
right.
Year's.
Okay.
So yeah.
Yeah, I mean, the original content stuff, like we said, it's something we're both passionate about, and it's not a far departure from what we're already doing. It makes us better at client services. So I agree, kind of doubling down on our efforts there.
Next is work-life balance. For Christmas, I got 15 kickboxing classes for my sister. So
right on.
Hey, man.
Where is this?
La Jolla, so the boxing club in La Jolla. So gonna try to do that a couple times a week. Mix that in with the adult league and all that stuff. All of a sudden, start having some activities outside of the STN umbrella. So.
Congratulations.
Yeah.
My work-life balance is something I've been talking about for 8 years. I've wanted to do, but I finally signed up to climb Rainier next year.
Which was directly after this podcast, or last podcast, I thought.
Yeah.
Well, we had that discussion, and you're like, you know what, let me just book this thing.
Well, and, what I came to realize is that, I don't know if we were on this podcast talking about it because we have so many conversations, but, I think I look at someone who says like, oh, I hate my job, and I would say, well, why don't you quit and find a different one? And they say, I can't. I'm like, what do you mean you can't? And I see that a lot of times in other people, and then I realize that for 8 years, each year when I talked about Rainier, which is something I really want to do, and that it was like, well, why aren't you doing it? I was like, I can't. That's the exact same can't.
Exactly.
It's the exact same thing. So when I look at somebody and I think like, geez, man, just pull your head out of your ass and quit your job that you don't like,
or
and
develop
go and
a plan
do something
on how
different.
to go towards the ultimate
right.
goal.
But there's just always like a solution to get there, and mine was always, well, I don't have enough money. And then it was, I don't have enough time. And then, now Corinne is pregnant and we're having a kid. And I was like, well, now I can't because of the baby. And I'm like, wait a second.
Yeah.
Like, I can't do that because then when am I ever going to do it? And then I'm going to,
You can always find an excuse to why you're not doing it.
Yeah. And then on my deathbed, I'm like, man, I sure should have just taken the time, but I couldn't. I'm not going to look back and go, I couldn't. Be like, yeah, sure I could have.
Yeah. Plenty of time.
Yeah. So sometimes if there's something that you like really want to do and it's important to you, the whole I can't thing, if it's true that you can't, then it has to be very temporary why you can't do that. And then you just have to find a solution to the can't so that then you can still work really hard. And even if
you're in nursing school and you're going to be slammed for the next 2 years, like that I can't can be relevant for 2 years. But in 2019, in February of 2019, I'm going to climb whatever.
Right. And if I had done that.
Climb Mount Rainier in the wintertime. But
if I had done that, the first year that I really wanted to climb it and I said, well, I can't, then I should have said, like, I can't right now, and here's why.
Yeah.
What steps do I need to take that next year? Because the problem was I had all the time in the world, but no money when I was going through school.
Yep.
And now that and it's not super expensive by any means, but it's like now that I had a little bit of money, I'm like, well, I don't have enough time. I'm like, well, that's just like a false problem that I'm putting myself in. So that's my work-life balance that I'm pumped about.
All right, so for the media spotlight, Mike, you don't have to really put audio on this, but this is the Ronda Rousey weigh-in. We are broadcasting here on a Friday, which UFC is going live 207 tonight. So it's not Saturday because they didn't want to compete with New Year's Eve.
That's right.
But Mike, if you want to throw this up, this is Rousey for her weigh-in. So she comes out. We're watching this on Facebook Live. She comes out. She is weighed in at 135. They say you're all good, and she walks right out. And that is the only time we've seen Ronda Rousey in this entire 207 hype-up event. And she said absolutely nothing. She wanted to do no media. I've watched some things with Dana White where he said, listen, we've talked about it. She's not going to say anything. She's not going to do any interviews. She's not going to do any of the UFC press that they require their fighters to do. He said this is a one-time thing. She asked me for it, and I'm going to allow her to do it simply because she's done so much for the UFC and da-da-da-da.
Simply because my ass. That's leverage all day. That's all that is.
However, what I will say, I think there's a brilliance behind this whole thing because for me, the fact that I haven't heard anything from Rousey really since the Holly Holm fight, that's her only loss after one of the most dominated starts to probably any professional career. There's this aura of what is going on, and there's a lot of speculation about she's in the best shape of her life and she's been training like an animal. But if she comes out and just gets knocked out by Nunes in the first round, it's just going to be the end of her career and the end of the whole thing. But if she comes out and knocks her out in 13 seconds, it's like, oh my God, she's back. So it's part of it's like her not saying anything, I think is kind of brilliant, and maybe something that her and Dana White or UFC talked about, that instead of her answering all the questions, leave it all up for speculation until the fight, and you'll see what happens on fight night.
I disagree that I think it was like some sort of joint marketing ploy between Dana and her. I do think that like the biggest outcome.
Could hear all that.
So the outcome of the fight with Holly Holm was shocking. I mean, physically she was injured, and I think they gave her like a 6-month ban because she had like a facial fracture or something.
And she went into hiding since then.
Yeah, and I mean she even came out and said she was thinking about retirement and that she felt suicidal at times. So it was really a crushing blow, more so to her ego than it was physically. So I think for her on this one, she looked back at her behavior prior to the Holly Holm fight and was probably a little bit embarrassed. She kind of like pushed Holly Holm's face during the face-off.
Right.
And she behaved a little outside of what she normally did, partially maybe because she was worried about that challenge.
I guess my point, just looking at it from a marketing standpoint, I think originally, if you're right, and Rousey's told Dana White, this is how it's going to be, brother, and he's like, God dang it, like I want to like pump this fight up. I think for me anyway, as a viewer, I am more interested the fact that I know nothing about what's going on in her head right now and get to watch what goes down, opposed to she opens up in a 30-minute interview with Joe Rogan on ESPN or what have you, and you know what she's been thinking the last year and how she took it, and she opened up all this stuff, and then you kind of feel like you know what's going to happen maybe on fight night. So it's been the aura of not knowing, I think, has developed a marketing campaign in itself.
It has. I would assume, with no data to back myself up on this, that they've seen pre-fight pay-per-view subscriptions down versus other fights where people were doing promotion, because ESPN will take that interview. And because of that, you're going to get
and that's
publicity.
why McGregor does so well, because he talks shit the entire time.
Right, you're going to get publicity the entire time, and more eyeballs are going to see it and remind more people. I think it's been harder now, unless you really follow UFC, to know.
I've just seen a lot of news on a lot of different networks, like Rousey refuses to talk. Rousey says no interviews. Dana White responds to the fact that Rousey will not participate in UFC all this stuff. So.
I feel like that content probably gets less views than Rousey sitting down and talking about the challenge.
I mean,
so the numbers will be out from the fight, and
fight.
if it's a major dip in any of her other fights, I think it probably has less to do with the fact that she lost her last one and more to do with the fact that she didn't promote.
And the fact that it is on a Friday, I do think some people are going to forget that it is tonight instead of a Saturday or a weekend. And with the whole New Year's Eve and holiday, it's kind of a weird date for them to pick. I wish they would have probably done it 208 or 209 or what have you, just because it's kind of a weird holiday season fight. But anyways,
cool.
Your media spotlight.
Let's play it. So this goes back to your thing about the whole 2016. You're over it. It's not as bad.
That.
Well, but 2016, you're saying that people are saying like it was so
the worst
terrible,
year ever.
And you're overhearing people complain about
Correct.
it. But I saw this video. I thought it was pretty funny. It's well produced, but it's essentially doing exactly what you're over. No sound on the broadcast. All right, so there's no sound on the broadcast, so we'll kill it. Anyway, so the entire video is basically just going through all the
Have you
horrible
killed the sound?
things
Right.
that have happened in 2016. So she hears that Prince died and David Bowie died and all this stuff, and so
It's been a
basically it's
crazy
just
year
like
for that type of
they
stuff.
they make it to where 2016 was a big horror story, capped off with the election. So yeah, that was my media spotlight. I think it was well produced, timely. I'm sure that'll get, those are the kind of things that I look at too, and I'm like, well, why didn't we think of that? Because that'll get 30 million views.
And I will say, the whole Simon Sinek thing we talked about a few weeks ago, actually, about millennials and why you have to treat them a little differently in the workforce. That's making its rounds now. I know you've seen it on Facebook, but it's
literally everywhere.
It's everywhere, yeah.
Yeah.
But it's weird how we talked about it 4 weeks ago, but now, I mean, my cousin shared it or whatever yesterday. And just the viral nature of that video has been live for months.
Yeah.
And someone cut it up, put a little meme over it, like why millennials have issues. And it's a 15
I guess
video.
I'm just so exhausted. You're exhausted with the whole 2016 was terrible thing. I could go the rest of my life not hearing another article or video about why millennials X, Y, and Z.
Yeah,
I think it's so bogus. I just find none of the insight valuable.
I don't know if it's bogus, but I am sick of millennials. The word alone is just this a keyword that people are using it, or this buzzword.
Right, but I mean, outside of just Simon Sinek, how many times have you heard the whole, they got trophies for participating, and they need to feel all special inside, and they want to make an impact.
I do think
you're a millennial. You're in the same generation. Everybody that works here is in that same thing.
Yeah, but I
don't feel that way about any of the people here.
No, but there's a major difference from our 21-year employee to your dad when he was in the workforce. Major difference.
Right, but I mean, Simon is what? He's born in 78 or something, a few years before.
But he's not talking about personal experience. He's talking about on what people are coming into the workforce with.
Right. I don't know. I just felt I think the whole idea of these millennials want to make an impact.
When you say that voice, it makes it stupid as hell.
But I mean, the thing that's coming across is basically that millennials are lazy and they want to make a big impact. But it's the exact same. That's the exact same outlook that people had for the generation that's saying it now.
I totally disagree.
You don't think that people were saying that about hippies?
No, but I just think that there was in
the 60s,
there was a mindset I'm going to go to Ford, I'm going to go to the factory, I'm going to put in my 9 to 5, my 40 hours, I'm going to work here for 40 years, I'm going to get my pension, I'm going to holler.
You think the hippie movement felt that way?
I'm not saying the hippie movement. I'm saying the majority of our old parents' generation or grandparents' generation. You go to Edison, you work there 40 years, you get promoted, you get your pension, and then that was life. And I think this generation is different, where they're not just going to go somewhere for 40 years, work 9 to 5, be almost robotic-like, and keep on being super happy. It's different.
I agree, but I think that shift happened so many years ago that to look at the generation that's younger right now and feel like they're so different. But I mean, if you look at some of the people who are talking about millennials, they're protesting and they're talking about trigger warnings and they need to feel special. A lot of those same people making those claims are from the generation from the 60s, where they were protesting about certain things and all about free love and didn't want to work in a corporation. So I'm just confused.
I agree that maybe the majority, there's a lot of information out there, especially on Inc. or whatever, 5 ways why millennials, that type of stuff.
I think because it gets clicks. It's
it gets clicks, and there's a lot of bogus information out there. However, I do think there's definitely a discussion about the difference from somebody born in 2005 and somebody born in 1955.
Of course.
And how that person interacts in the workforce, how they interact with
I agree.
friendships.
There's tons of differences. What I reject, and I don't even necessarily feel like I'm part of the millennial generation. I think, according to Simon Sinek and other things, it starts between 81 and 84, and I'm an 84, so I'm at the tail end.
No, it's 18 to
no, born in 1984 is what he quoted.
From 84 to
and I've
90
seen
or
other
something
people
like
that were born in 81 through not even 90, through 2000.
Okay.
Because I mean, if you're 16, you would probably be considered a millennial right now.
Right.
So I don't really consider myself in the thick of it, at least, but Alex Lambeth, he's probably right in the meat of that. I don't find any of those negative attributes that I hear constantly, and it's pretty widespread that they need to feel this certain way and they're lazy
You
and
don't
they think
feel those attributes?
I don't see that
I don't see
in most of the people that are millennials that I know. I don't feel like that's the consistent theme across it. And maybe just because we only hire, studs. But most of the feedback that I hear on these articles about millennials is like painted in a negative light.
Oh, okay. Well, then that's, yeah.
Don't you feel that way too?
I'm not speaking to the negative at all. I do think that when you grow up in a world that you've had a cell phone since you were a kid, and you grew up in a Facebook world, and you grew up and you can text anybody you want and automatically, get feedback. It's a different world. So people have different needs and different wishes and wants than
right. But I mean, even the one that I keep seeing going around from him, and there's multiple segments, but it's the part where he talks about like the failure in parenting and the generation where if you're last place, you still got a trophy, and that, it's not their fault, but they were impacted negatively by that because they don't feel like, they actually feel embarrassed to get a trophy in last place. I don't
but you're not hanging out with a bunch of 23-year-olds right now either. So Alex Lambeth, if that's the person you're looking at, he is an outlier maybe, but he told me with his friend group, there's a lot of people that have those issues.
Right, but I think that's...
he's been able to rise above type deal.
But I agree. I think that's similar, though, across the board, where there's going to be people that are not, super hungry and going out and getting it. And sometimes I also feel like the whole, like, they want to be impactful really quick. I actually look at that as a great thing.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
Like, people want to work in smaller companies where they can be more impactful versus working for a huge
Assembly
company.
Line, yeah.
I mean, in my opinion, that's one of the biggest benefits, rather than, some of the quotes is like, look, you've only been here 8 months. Like, you got to wait it out and blah, blah, blah. And I think everyone's like, fuck that. I'm not waiting to be impactful somewhere. I can go to a smaller company where I can be impactful early. So I really think that that's wise, because if you go somewhere and you're like, hey, it's a big company, but like I can be impactful eventually, and you go and work for a larger firm, and after 7 years you realize like no one gives a shit about my success here at the company. So I guess, overall, there's a lot of clickbait millennial stuff.
When I worked in radio, Fox News, Fox Sports out of college, like I was trying to get my own show, and I was beating down that door and talking to the program director. Maybe we'll give you a Saturday show. And I was doing these podcasts, and I was sending the tape to the program director. How about now? And they never gave me that opportunity. I said, deuces.
Right.
Yeah.
Because you wanted to be impactful immediately.
Yeah. Not even immediately. That was after 3 years. Like, all right, man, after 3 years, I'm not going to be stupid enough to be here for 10 years and still complain that they never gave me an opportunity. So after 3 years, I made the assessment, like, you know what? I can do this a different way, and kind of went the social media route more so than the traditional I'm going to have. And thank God, because I don't want to be on the radio right now.
And because of that, because you were like wanted to be impactful and wanted to matter and didn't want to like wait your turn to climb in and maybe get a chair somewhere. And I think you saw the writing on the wall too, is that it wasn't the best person for the job was going to get it. You would say when they were looking for fill-in hosts, they wouldn't even tap the people who are very clearly passionate enough to have a career for very little money and be there. They would tap other guys that could just fill in.
If anybody enjoys this type of discussion, Seth Godin has a great book called The Dip, just to know the difference between I need to wait my turn and I got to make a U-turn and get the hell out of here.
Yeah.
And that's a significant thing that people have to realize. Like, winners quit all the time. They just quit the right things at the right time.
Right. But I do think that whole... wanting to be impactful and wanting to make a difference and wanting to do everything. That's the best quality about that whole generation. And I think it's why there'll be more entrepreneurs and there'll be more interesting products and innovative designs from that generation.
And to end, my whole point is I think if you look at how this new generation has been brought up, and maybe the 21-year-old, you can't just expect like, well, my dad worked at Edison for 40 years and he showed up every morning at 8 a.m. and why the hell is my employee not doing that? You have to understand the difference of how different people grew up with different technology and different things.
Yeah, and I do think maybe sometimes those are a little more valuable, or at least geared towards people who are older than us.
Even with education.
That are like, I don't get these young kids at all.
Everybody's, I think every generation, if you don't do it exactly how they did it, it's like with music, with whatever. It's just
if there's 40 years difference between two people, the older person's not going to get what the younger kids are doing as much, and that's pretty standard over everything. Mm-hmm. So I don't think there's anything totally separate and way different about millennials versus any other gap in generation stuff.
Right.
And I just overwhelmingly, it seems like most of the feedback is negative about why millennials are so X, Y, and Z.
But I guess like Gary Vee made a good point. Like, you see 14-year-olds now that take 74 selfies to get the perfect one. They put it in their app, and they may make themselves skinnier or put a filter on top. they posted the Instagram, and if they don't get 100 likes in an hour, they delete that photo. Like, that's a little bit of a different, like, society we're living in that, like, girls are going through that I think maybe not so much in the workforce, but that wasn't happening in 1955.
No, because we
you know,
didn't
so-
have those things.
Right.
But in 1955, people were ironing their poodle skirts and, brushing their hair 500 times to make sure that it was nice and shiny or whatever. So there's weird things that the adult would be like, these kids are, focusing on all the wrong things. And I don't buy it as much on this generation. Yeah, I don't see the negatives in what they're trying to bring up necessarily.
All right, so we'll move on to our Q&A advice section. I'll just ask everybody to go to my Twitter, at David J. Brickley. I tweeted an article called The Tail End, Wait But Why, when it comes to relationships. It's an article Tim Ferriss shared, and it pretty much broke down, like, if you only hang out with your parents, like, twice a year, or you only hang out with them around Christmas time, which was a great article to read around the holidays, then... if your parent is 60 and we're going to say they're going to live to, 90, you're only going to hang out with your parent 30 more times in your life.
Right.
Like, when you look at it like that, like, I'm only going to be able to sit next to my dad 30 more times and then he's going to die. That's
It's not enough.
Not enough. So maybe you fly back home more or whatever. When you put it down like in a checklist and understand, like, hey, if I only see my buddy from high school, or, us 4 guys that used to be in the same frat or whatever only get together every 4 years. Well, if you're going to live till you're 90, you only have, 13 more times that you're going to, So it was just a very interesting article. I suggest everybody read it.
Yeah, it's cool. Mine is, success is not final. Failure is not fatal. It is the courage to continue that counts.
This is your quote of the week?
Yeah.
Oh, we're on
Wait, what did you say?
Q&A and advice section.
Oh, Q&A and advice.
Same deal.
My advice is positive attitude is a choice in most circumstances. Unless there's something really tragic going on in your life, you can choose to have a positive attitude,
Yep.
and immediately it changes the way that you perform and the way that others interact with you. And, I think that there's some times where I can get into a rut where I'll even, like, say sarcastically negative things, but I can tell if I do that for like 2 days, I'll feel worse.
Yeah.
Where if I almost trick myself into saying like positive things and,
One thing I've done, like, I want to do more of, but I'll, like, notice my friend has, like, a new shirt or whatever. That's a pretty dope. Like, in your mind,
looking good.
Yeah, but in your mind, you're like, that's actually Brett's new coat looks pretty cool. But you forget to say it out loud, but internally you're, like, thinking it, to just force yourself to, like, say that out loud.
Yeah.
Because that person will probably feel, what is going on? Anyways.
Yeah, I agree. Like those little things where you like, yeah,
it's like a chore though. You think,
and
I
like,
need to
why
say
not
that.
do that? You would like it if somebody said it to
course.
you, and it's not like vain, and it's not like, oh, that's
And you're
bullshit.
not trying too hard. You actually are feeling it. Like, you're having a conversation in your head. Like, that's a cool coat. I would wear that.
Yeah.
Why not say that out loud and make that person?
Well,
feel
and
better?
I haven't worked out in 15 years.
Oh,
But anyway,
because you
when
can't, right? You don't have enough time.
I know it's bullshit. But when I was lifting a lot, it didn't happen very often. But a few people
Oh,
would
it's
be
great.
like,
That's all you need.
would be like, hey, dude, your shoulders are getting bigger.
You're looking bigger.
And that was after every day I was in the gym all the time. Or when somebody would walk up and be like, you put on some weight, dude. I'd be like, yeah. And it felt amazing. Just like I didn't need the justification for
No, but that would give you
anybody else.
That would give you motivation for the next 6 weeks to work out every day
Right.
at 7 a.m.
And then
because
sometimes
it's
they
working.
would say it in front of other people, and then other people would be like, yeah, dude, I noticed that a while ago.
Yeah.
And I'd be like, let me know, because I'm like working my tail off, and you see yourself every day.
You don't know, yeah.
And like, I don't need that for the vanity thing, but if you're working hard at something and then somebody recognizes it, even just a little bit, it's nice to hear that. And so to do that for other people, like if I see somebody that I can tell they've been working out, I'll let them know, like, hey,
Yeah.
You're looking good. Like, I can tell you've been working out, or ask them, like, you've been working out.
Right.
Something looks different. And most times people will be like, yeah, man, I've been hitting it. Like,
Yeah.
So just little stuff like that I agree is important.
Ben Salton has
Yeah.
a thought.
So I got a question for you guys about something you were talking about before. Going back to the Skype and WhatsApp conversation, and your conversation with your friend on the highway.
Yeah.
And then talking about before, Facebook shooting satellites out to get people more service and stuff. How long, or do you guys think, until phone networks are obsolete?
Soon.
Yeah, because I think, even I've read stuff about 5G that's going to be 100 to 1,000 times faster. So once you get to that type of speed, I just feel like Yeah, there's going to be Wi-Fi in your car, and then sooner rather than later, they're going to beam Wi-Fi across the whole city, starting with LA and San Francisco probably.
Yeah, I'm predicting in 10 years, the value of DirecTV, Cox, AT&T, anything,
Brett Regan's cold stone lock of the day here.
but anything that is a service provider that is not the actual content creator, they're going to have a really hard time in the next 10 to 15 years because Facebook will just provide that. If you have Wi-Fi, then you won't need those service providers.
Well,
so Hulu will be fine.
It's the same with Amazon, right? Like, we're not going to pay UPS and FedEx anymore. We're going to create our own parcel service so we don't have to pay the middleman. Like, that's just going to happen with everything.
Right. But, like, the whole, what's the bill that's always the Net Neutrality Act?
Mm-hmm.
Like, that's going to have some serious consequences, and that's going to be their last stand to try. By that, I mean the service providers. But pretty soon, once people are beaming Wi-Fi, and Wi-Fi is either incredibly cheap or free because all the advertisers just want to reach people and get into their homes. Anybody that's laying cable or building towers, you're out.
And even the fact that you can go to any Starbucks or any McDonald's and it's just Wi-Fi, it's free. You can have your laptop. Like, we've already seen where it's not beamed across, an entire city, but within every block has somewhere you can hop into and have Wi-Fi.
And what's interesting about that, I think, is because you don't really need it. Facebook doesn't need to do that to get the United States. They've already got the United States, and now their only hope for growth is to get people who aren't already on Facebook using Facebook, and the people that aren't on Facebook are the ones that don't have internet.
Yep.
So if they can go to India and Africa and other remote areas in the world that don't have major infrastructure for that, and they can beam that to them and give them Facebook.
Well, think about when
they're going to quadruple.
They gave us telephones, everybody in America had a telephone. So if you give a society like that, beam them internet and give them Facebook, then everybody's that's just gonna be how they communicate.
Right.
And
Yeah, but I mean,
that's kind of what's happening with the cable companies now, right? As everything goes a la carte, you really don't need a
right.
Well, just look at the mergers and acquisitions, and that'll tell you every story you need to know. Comcast purchased NBC, and the reason they did that is because they saw the writing on the wall. They said, unless we're the media rights holder, long-term strategy-wise, we're going to be out. Everybody's going to be
What's
Wi-Fi.
the one that hasn't gone through yet? The Time Warner?
Verizon.
No, I thought that already went through. What's the one that
Verizon Yahoo? Oh, Time Warner and
AT&T DirecTV? Yeah.
Yes. So that's another one where AT&T bought.
Would then own HBO and Turner and TNT
AT&T bought
CNN.
DirecTV so that they could have a little bit of the service provider market locked. Now, if they can pair with the media, then they're probably safe.
Yep.
They've done their acquisition and did what they had to do, and Comcast has done what they had to do to secure NBC. And I wouldn't be surprised if Comcast tried to do another acquisition. This is not a prediction, but it wouldn't surprise me.
Brett Regan prediction.
It wouldn't surprise me if Comcast maybe put in a bid for Twitter. It doesn't seem like a terrible fit to me, especially because they already bought Yahoo, right?
Well, Yahoo was got.
Who bought Yahoo? No, Verizon bought Yahoo.
Verizon bought Yahoo.
But there's, everybody's talking about the media landscape is going to be totally crazy. A lot of M&A in 2017. But it's going to be those service providers buying media companies so that they own the rights, so that when they don't have to lay cable anymore and they don't have that volume, they can still get their content to people. And we've talked about that quite a bit. The service providers are gone.
Yep. All right, so for the quote of the week, my quote, I think you already said yours, right? But my quote is, "You are never too old to set another goal or dream a new dream." That's by Les Brown. Just around some of my family around the holidays, like, you're so lucky to be doing what you're doing and doing something you love, and I hate my job, just like you mentioned earlier. Well, even if you're 45, 50, 55 years old, doesn't mean you can't set a plan for the next 2 or 3 years, end up quitting your current job, and for the next 30 years, you can be doing something you really do love.
Yeah. To that point, I read an article recently, and it was about, I think it was local, but some lady that, owned a bar around here and was finally retiring.
Around San Diego?
Around San Diego. It was like, lady owned a bar in San Diego, and she was like, 85 or something, and everybody loved her, but she was going to hang it up, and somebody else was going to take over, and she owned this bar. And I just assumed, she must have just owned it forever. She bought it when she was 58.
That's great.
And then you just assume her in this entire area.
Identity, yeah.
her identity is by something that was started at retirement age. So it kind of made me think too. It's like you can do something your entire life almost, and then just start something different.
And like all of us and our friends are going to live to their at least 90, and then like the next generation probably 110. So like there's so many years left. It's just like if you're 58, you may have another 30. I mean, 3 decades of solid work that you can be putting in. So why would you?
I mean, even if you're 60 and you go another 10 years, 10 years is a long time.
Yeah.
I mean, 10 years is probably longer than the average marriage.
And
it's
to your
longer than
point,
the average time spent at a
we talk about
company.
the difference of generations. It really was retire when you're 65, get your pension, get your retirement, do a little traveling, and die at 75. But now with what we're doing, it's like maybe you start a new company at 65 and then you work for another 30 years.
Right.
Like, who knows?
And at the risk of opening up the millennial discussion again, which we've beat to death, but all of the people that went and did those types of companies and worked at an AT&T or a Verizon or something, it was also because those benefits existed.
Yeah, those are all gone.
Because you could start a job with little experience, but you would get a pension and health care and a 401k.
One of my family members worked in was a cop and worked for 30 years, and he retired at 60, and he makes $100,000 a year every single year because he had that pension.
Right.
Which that just can't scale for 30 years, so they've stopped that now. But
right, but I mean, partially the reason why millennials aren't going into those companies because there's no benefits.
it's true.
left.
Why would you? Yeah.
Why would you
work
go
your
to
ass off?
AT&T if they're like, yeah, we don't match anymore, and as soon as you start making too much money, we're going to make you an independent contractor, and I mean those kind of things happen all the time. So it's also a lot of those benefits that were blown up by that generation in 2008.
But wasn't it blown up too by people just living longer? Like all those benefits initially were like, all right, you'll retire at 65, you'll die in 5 years, and then we'll be off the hook.
I mean,
But
that's
when
social security, yes.
When you live for 35 or 40 years. Well, what about if you retire at 65 back in the day, and you retire, and you live to your 95, then isn't your company paying you 30 years of that same salary or that retirement pension? I think so.
Potentially, yeah. But I mean, it's also not adjusted for inflation. So if it's a true pension, then it's a flat rate.
Okay.
So if you're getting, let's say $3,000 a month, $3,000 a month over the span of, 55 years, if you're living a long time, isn't as bad. But yes, you're right. It's still an issue because you've got those on the books where my previous job that I worked in financial services, we were trying to get people to not take those pension benefits and just get a lump sum so that they could go out and do it. But, $3-5 grand per
But let's
month
say you get
every month.
Yeah,
it's
like
a lot.
let's say they match your yearly salary at $100,000 and you die the next year. They're only out $100,000. Let's say the police force or whatever. But if you live another 30 years, they're out $3 million. Like that's a huge difference.
And a lot of those pensions too had a rider where the spouse would be able to take it over. So if you were like the man of the house and you something happened to you and you died at 67, but your wife lived to 90, then it's transferable to your spouse.
Did they do that knowing, like thinking that they could get away with it, or was it just because so many people died earlier that it was just like a great thing to offer for a few years and then they would drop
You got to
dead?
keep in mind at large corporations like this,
They don't project.
the person who is looking to get new talent is looking at that as a great deal because we don't even have to think about
And
that right now.
He'll be long gone by the time they have to worry about
Sayonara.
that.
I'll be on my in my villa in France by the time that comes around. So they were just like long-term decisions that didn't require a lot of new money to be spent.
The government's done that too with Social Security and made some mistakes.
Well,
and
it's
all
the
that
same
stuff,
thing
yeah.
if you look at the police force and the fire. I mean, those were made by city officials that said, "Hey, we want more people.
We'll figure it out later.
We'll figure it out later." And by we, that means somebody else. And
Taxpayers.
that's been the issue the whole time is that people can make those promises because they want votes for Social Security and Medicare and Medicaid. And yes, everybody wants it. And now it's starting to get to the point where across the board, whether you're a company or a government or a city or a municipality, now you've got to actually start paying those things, and you realize like this is not sustainable.
Yep.
So that wasn't the fault of the millennials. Gosh darn it.
With that, it's been Entrepreneur Wrap episode 008, the last of 2016. Next time we talk to you guys, it'll be 2017, so we hope you have a happy new year. Of course, we ask you always to subscribe on iTunes. You can email Brett at BRETT at STN.digital. Email myself, David, DAVID at STN.digital. Any final words of advice for the last couple days of the year here?
I think the only advice that I would give is to subscribe to our podcast on iTunes. And if you are a Facebook Live watcher, listener, please comment. Let us know if there's anything where there's multiple people asking about a specific topic and we think it would be valuable to the viewers. David and I are more than happy to do a kind of specific, shorter podcast on topics.
Ronda Rousey or Amanda Nunes tonight?
I know nothing about the challenger, so I'm
Challenger is a champion, current champ.
Is she? Okay.
She's only
I'm
fought
going to go with Rousey. I think one
Knockout?
loss.
Knockout or decision?
I'm going to go with
Armbar, submission?
Yeah, I'm going to go with submission.
Submission?
I think she's going to go back to her roots, her judo roots, and do a. I'm not gonna guess the actual submission technique. I'm just going to go with submission.
Armbar in the second round. It is. All right, there it is. Entrepreneur Wrap episode 8. Thanks so much for listening.
Happy New Year.